And welcome to Make It Happen Mondays. We're here to help you get success without stress by sharing stories, strategies, and asking questions that'll help you get clarity of what you want and the confidence to make it happen. And in today is no different. I am really blessed to have the wonderful author Steve Hargreaves with us, who's written the book called The Compassionate Leader's Playbook. But we'll be talking today about interruptions and attention. So if you know that you are not working at your best because you're not good at managing interruptions, this is the show for you. So without any further ado, let's bring Stephen onto the show and find out what he knows. So welcome, Steve.
Good morning, Cheryl. Lovely to see you.
Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit. I have a copy of the book. I have been reading it. This has been my personal development again this morning. I was very privileged to be part of reading the first draft as well, so I did get insights in early on. So tell us, before we get into this thing about interruptions, tell us a little bit about the Compassionate Leaders Playbook. What is it about? Who's it for? And what's your vision for the book?
Okay, well, I suppose I'm really interested in this whole idea of how you awaken the power of compassion. I suppose that's individually, but at the organisational level as well. And for many years, as in organisations as a director and then going freelance, this area of how do you leverage and manage the power of compassion, and how does that impact on productivity and performance and well-being. So I try to write a book which is very practical, which is very pragmatic, and lays out an approach to how you can awaken compassion, both in yourself, in your team, and across your organization, and why that's important, and how you can do it. I mean, I'm an operational director by background, so I wrote a book which I believe is very practical on the so what question. Okay, Steve, so that's interesting. You tell me about compassion and the power of it, but so what? How can I awaken that? How can I, in my day-to-day practice and reflection and thinking, bring that to bear in my leadership? So that's what the book's about.
And so what is compassion for you? Your definition of it. What does compassion mean?
Well, I suppose I position compassion around the alleviation of suffering. And I use that word specifically because I believe there is too much suffering in the workplace. I think sometimes the workplace is the cause of it. I think sometimes we bring suffering to it. But either way, I think organizations and leadership have a responsibility to respond. And I suppose that's my opener. So I think compassion for me is a step further than empathy. So Cheryl, if you know you're in distress or suffering, or you suffer some misfortune, if I imagine and feel what you're going through, I'm beginning to express some empathy and feel that from your perspective. And that's really important. I hold that moment with you, and I understand the need to explore that with empathy. Compassion for me is the next step on. It's when we have such feelings where we're so aligned with your suffering that we're compelled to act, to actually take some thoughtful, meaningful and considered action. And the reason I think that's so important in leadership is because in leadership we're called often to act. And I think compassionate action is around how do we alleviate, mitigate and prevent suffering, either to ensure that we're not the cause of it in our management and leadership style, that the organisation systems and processes don't inadvertently exacerbate it, and where individually I can respond to it. And that isn't the same as leaders and managers becoming counsellors and therapists, as wonderful as those professions are. This is about responding with compassion and being aware of how suffering can play out in an organisation.
Yeah. And so on the book, there's a diagram here, isn't there? And I'll just read out. So we've got the first one here is attention, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'm just noticing it's very similar to the colour of the background. I didn't do that on purpose. I thought only I was that organised. We've got humility, fairness, respect, integrity, empathy and courage. And we're going to focus on attention because I think one of the things that can cause, and I think not just really in the corporate world, but now that a lot of us are now ended up in this hybrid, working from home, working for offices, we've got interruptions at multiple levels now. It's not just at work, it's also at home. So we're not only just managing whether our clients interrupt or we get interrupted by social media or our partner or our children, the dog, as you mentioned earlier, is that there's all these interruptions. So tell us a little bit about what do you cover under this section? I know I've read it and I can ask some questions, but what is it for you about interruptions and attention? Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I think to simplify it, I start off with the idea of we need to pay attention to what we're paying attention to. So I think really, whether I'm working with clients or teams, it's about developing awareness about, what are we paying attention to, and being intentional about our own levels of attention to what that is. And by that, I mean, are we busy being busy, or are we busy creating value? And I say that simplistically, but they can be tough things to unravel. And I deliberately use that term interruptions and interference, about what are the things that interfere with us being able to optimize our potential. So whether that's at an individual level, or whether that's at a team or an organizational level, what is getting in the way from me being able to maximize my potential, or this team maximizing their potential? So part of the work around that is, and often I'll ask this question to individuals and teams: when do you do your best work? And more often than not, and there's a body of research to support this, people will often say, particularly in pre-pandemic world, and let's bring it onto the now world after, I do it on the commute to work. I stay later in the office. I do it at the weekends. And horrifyingly, some people will tell me they'll do it on holiday. And they'll talk about work when they're in flow, when they're in high concentration, high impact, high value, high intensity work. And I'll say, well, tell me about that. And they'll go, well, that's because I'm interrupted less. So I say, well, hang on. Okay, so you're going to work 9 to 5, if indeed that's your routine, and you're telling me your best work is done outside of work. I get it. It's kind of bonkers, isn't it? And it's not because people are in any way doing anything wrong or anything like that. So I look at it with great compassion and go, okay, so what's happening during the day? And I use this word interferences. We can be the source of significant interference towards others. We can be the recipients of interference. And an example I give at the organizational level is, let's look at a manager, for example. So they might be in their corner office, lovely, and they've been doing some high flow, high concentration work for an hour or so in the morning. And I've just done my work. That's great. I need to re-energize. So I either pop out of my corner office or I wander around. All right, Bob, how are you? And I go and have a chat with Mary, and I see Cheryl over there, and all the rest of it. So I re-energize by going out there, engaging with my team. And I've been that person, and I've been the person who's received that person. I suppose my example is, we begin to interfere and interrupt others, and then at the desk, Cheryl, Steve, Mary, we are the recipient of that interference. Now, I don't want to over dramatize it, because part of that is about engaging with your team and everything else. My point is, that's an interference, and it might be an unwanted one. I might have just been getting in some flow. I might have just been doing some high concentration tasks. And Cheryl, you've rocked up and started, chatting to me about what happened last night and everything else. So, of course, if you multiply that, whether it's meetings, whether it's social media, whether it's emails, and of course, some of those interferences are legitimate. I think the point for me is, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? How do we separate out where can we minimize interferences and interruptions? When are they legitimate and we should tolerate them, and when don't? So we need to discriminate better across them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Cheryl?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that got us curious, and why we said we're going to do the interview today, was about time and timing. And I think that's the reality there. And I'm seeing it more and more with my clients, as well as sole traders, working from home, working parents, is that they're getting up earlier and earlier in the morning. And I'm an early riser. But it was only during the pandemic when I really lost all alone time, having, my husband and my son both working from home. Suddenly I realised there was no time when the house was quiet. And I realised that I was getting up earlier because it was the only time I had time to think and process, where nobody would interrupt or just be going, oh, I can't find this. Or sometimes they weren't even talking to me. It was just the fact I could hear them in the kitchen and couldn't find something that I knew where it was. And I was sort of it was taking more energy trying to ignore what was going on out there to be able to, got myself caught on that. So I think it's really important that we know that. And I guess for me, what I learned is then I got to a point in winter, I was like, I don't want to have to get up this early. I'm quite happy in the sun, spring and the summer when there's come up with the sun, but actually I didn't want to do it in the winter. So then I had to go, I need to set some boundaries, and I need to say to people, actually, for the first hour, I really need to be doing this. And I think we talked, you said you've got an in-meeting sign, haven't you, outside?
Yeah. So this is, I'm simplistic. So I converted the back of the garage when I went freelance. So I've got an in a meeting sign, and then I've got my blank sign. So if any of the family are about, they can see this. You come in, no problem at all. And if that's there, they know that I'm in a meeting. The question with that is I mustn't abuse this. If I leave that there all day, not to be interrupted, that's quickly going to discredit it. But I think the point there, and Brené Brown mentions this idea of clear is kind, clarity is kind. So I think there's something, and I had to almost recontract with the family when I started working from home. I mean, you have to kind of live in the real world about that because you're at home and all the rest of it. But there is something about it's kind to be clear, both to ourselves and to others. So there are some boundaries that are needed. They need to be realistic. They need to be, based in what is achievable rather than sometimes aspirational. But we need to set some boundaries to enable all of us to function in that way. But again, I go back to that idea of interferences. Whether that resonates with anybody watching or listening, but I like that idea of interference. Let's identify where we're interfering. And an exercise I'll do with clients and teams is let's look at all the levels of interferences, all the things that are getting in the way, and let's categorize them into me. When am I the source of interference for myself? That could be, I don't know, it could be confidence, it could be self-belief, it could be whatever it could be. But me, where are others the source of interference? And when is the organisation a source of interference, and when are there other environmental factors? And we can split them and categorise them into those things. And then we can think about what can we control and what can we influence. But the main area I like to focus on is me, is you, Cheryl. Yeah. When are you the main source of interference? Because that's what we can first start dealing with. And your main job in this exercise is to identify them and to begin to think about how can you minimise them. Yeah. And that whole area of interference, is an area I think is worth kind of talking about. But being clear about what I can control and influence, and then the strategy about what are the things I can't control and influence, and how do I begin to make my peace with some of those and ensure that they don't distract me too much. And a lovely exercise to do is the I like, I loathe exercise.
No.
You get lots of little bits of paper. I like. And then another one, I loathe. And you get a stack.
Loathe. I thought you said I know. Okay, I like and I loathe.
And if you don't like I loathe, you can go I like, I dislike. That's a bit bit softer. But basically, over the period of a week, every time you're doing something that you like or something that you loathe, you quickly jot it down. Not too much, but just enough to remember it. And you end up with a kind of piles. And then you can go through it with a coach or a colleague or do some self-reflection to begin to look at what's this telling me? How am I beginning to spend my time? What am I paying attention to? And of course, that can also be a little bit uncomfortable because it might let us know that actually I'm spending an awful lot of time on the things I like. But my job does require me to do some of the things that I might loathe. And you can have a really interesting conversation about that, because sometimes we spend time doing things that we like and things that are hard and easy or what have you. So there is a point of honesty and self-awareness about how we spend our time.
Yeah, and as I've been listening to you, because I talked to you, I don't know if you heard the door click, but somebody opened the door just now. Yeah. Yes. So those are watching the replay. And that's partly because I don't have a sign when I'm on, because generally if people hear me talking, they know that I'm on a call or I'm videoing or whatever. But because I was quiet and I was listening to you and we're on headphones, nobody could hear anything. So, of course, the door's open. My son's come in and I've done a wave on the outer screen to say, no, can't talk right now. And they've gone, and that's fine. But what just the light bulb moment is the bit that I struggle working on. My struggle, when I use the word struggle, it means it's something that is a work in progress at the moment. I'm looking to develop a new behaviour around. Is this giving myself time to reflect? Because when I'm quiet, it's in here, it's often assumed that I'm available now and it's okay to talk. And I've realised if I don't get that time to think for myself. But as you were saying it, I was like, oh, yeah, but when I'm on my own and I am quiet, I do go on social media a lot. And so actually, if I was being more effective with that, I would have more time when other people want to, need to talk to me. And that is my role as a mother and a partner, as well as, when my PA or my Facebook manager need to talk to me, etc. My job is to be there for my team and my family. That's my purpose on the planet. And so it was just, I found myself going, oh, yeah, okay, that's the bit I can control. Because actually, sometimes I do it as a downtime thing. Sometimes it's just a winding down. So it is just something that's a restful thing. But obviously, like, we're in the economy of attention. And actually, we're talking about attention, aren't we? It's very easy to get pulled into that. And before I know it, I've seen a dress and I'm off shopping and I'm looking for things that isn't what this time is actually allocated for. So I guess with that in mind, and I know you've got a whole load of questions in your playbook, and so for those that are sort of thinking about looking at the book, there's a entourage of questions to think about, but you're also asking people to score themselves and then coming back 6-12 months later, so that you are, which is a really big part for the work I do, is you need to know the purpose, the reason you're doing it. You need to know the process. You're going to do these things, but you have to track progress. Otherwise, and we can so easily get into patterns, can't we, of not realising we've gone back to an old habit or an old behaviour, maybe because it's more comfortable watching social media than doing the other thing that I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, look, we have to be really kind to ourselves, and at the core of my model of compassionate leadership is self-compassion. So this is never something about, we want to avoid, well, I like to not blame, shame, feeling bad about ourselves or anything along those lines. And in the book I've called it the 360 degrees of compassion Self-Diagnostic. And basically at the beginning of each chapter, around the characteristics of compassion, it invites you to go through this self-diagnostic. But really as a self-reflection, everybody's on their own, I'm going to use that word, journey, but it is about understanding, where am I on the journey? Where is it that I would like to be? And I think that's really important. And then treating ourselves with some kindness along the way, because, if for example, we felt actually, it's that 1 to 10 scale, isn't it? If I feel a 10 out of 10 is, I spend my day like this, and that's how I want to spend it. But currently I'm at a 3 out of 10. I don't think we make a stride from 3 to 10 in one. I think, let's be realistic about the world we live in. I think sometimes if I go, if I'm at 3 out of 10 now, what does a 4 out of 10 look like? What does a 5 out of 10 look like? And what are the steps I can take to get there? So, so we don't set ourselves up, to fail in that respect. But let's be a little bit kind ourselves along the way. And I think the point here is, as always with these conversations, is how can I develop enhanced self-awareness and insight about me, how I'm showing up, how I'm being purposeful and present and personal. What does that tell me? And does that lead me to think about some different choices I can make? Well, then that's great, isn't it? But then what? Because actually that's almost like, as hard as that can be, that's almost the easiest bit, because the next bit is, flipping heck, I've got to unlearn some old habits, learn some new habits. I've got to, it's a bit tiring, having to bring my attention on this all the time. And you're going to drop the ball, aren't you? Because we're ultimately flawed, imperfect human beings that are going to regularly drop the ball and muck up. So we need to show ourselves a dose of self-compassion along the way. But I think there's something about, which is why I like the term interference. And if it doesn't resonate with people, you can put whatever term on that it does, and because that requires a bit of honesty, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Start to minimize it. If we minimize the interferences, we can begin to optimize our potential, if that organizational language works for anyone. But to do that, we have to identify what steps we can take. And I think it's kind of cool if you can have somebody work with you on that, be an accountability partner, a colleague, a coach, someone who can just, encourage us along the way. That would be and I think that's, the very first question you say is, I prioritize listening and hearing, even if I might not like what I hear. And then you're asking us to sort of grade it: rarely, sometimes, often, very often, always. I provide clarity of direction and purpose to others. And they are questions that are going to challenge you. And I think that I just did a video actually in one of my community groups this morning about, we have to be able to ask those questions to get clarity. And we have to be okay with that we may not like what we hear, because the reality is that it might be something we're doing ourselves. It's very easy to be, it's them if they were doing it. But when you go, oh my gosh, and in the journey, I've been on a personal development journey for the last 15, 16 years. And I remember, even I sometimes go, it's me. It's like, I was really hoping on this one occasion, it was going to be somebody else's responsibility. But of course, it's my journey, it's my life, and it's my actions that have the biggest impact on what goes on. So with that in mind, I want to just pop the name of the book down the bottom so people have got it, because I've realised I didn't do that earlier. So let's just do that now. Let's pop that across the bottom. So it's the Compassionate Leaders Playbook, how to lead with compassion and ensure your people thrive. So just to close off today's interview then, what would be your 3 tips in terms of, if you're saying go from a 3 to a 4,
if you're knowing you've got a lot of interference, you've got a lot of interruptions happening, and you want to start paying attention to your attention, what would be your 3 top tips to sort of just shift yourself along one step, so to speak, in that?
Well, I think the first thing is taking some time to intentionally do some of this work. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to say, and that can be a great gift you can give to yourself. Whether that's for half an hour or 40 minutes. Whether it's using something from the book or something else you found. But I think prioritizing some self-reflection, but intentional self-reflection. And if you're somebody that likes a pragmatic and practical approach to things, then get a practical, pragmatic tool. If you like something more academic, then all the rest of it. But I think be intentional about that. Ensure you're answering the so what question, which is, as I'm developing awareness and insight, I have to ask myself the so what question. What is that going, so what? What is that going to lead me to do? And I don't mean to be dismissive. I think it's so important to gain insight and awareness. And of course, there's real merit in that process. But, so for me is the so what? What am I going to do next? And I think within that, it's asking ourselves sometimes that difficult question about is what is my will to change? How much will do I really have? And it's that 1 out of 10 question, isn't it? I might cognitively understand that I need to do some things differently. I might cognitively understand that actually this is going to be kind of good for me and all the rest of it. But where's my level of will? If I'm a 3 out of 10 on the will, maybe I need to just, think about coming back to it at a different stage or managing my expectations. But I think being honest ourselves about our will. I would say, I'll get on to 3 in a bit, but a part of 2 would be have somebody work with me through on it. And that can be an accountability partner, it can be a colleague, it could be a coach, someone who's going to gently hold me to account, but where holding me to account doesn't come with risks, outside of, me being held to account, but it's there's not greater risks than that. So I think accountability partners can be really, really helpful. And then thirdly, self-compassion. At the core of this all has got to be, and I don't want to be too woo-woo about this, because that, but, and that's okay, but that's just not me so much, is let's just be okay about setting ourselves some reasonable next step goals in a reasonable time scale. And let's be okay when we muck up, because we absolutely will, won't we? And that's okay. But not be too hard on ourselves. Lots of interruptions, lots of interferences, and they're not going to go away. Our job here is to identify them, have greater awareness and insight, and take some small steps to minimizing some of those. Then we can clear some room. And that will be a really great new habit to bring into our day-to-day. It's a long answer.
But let's just recap then. So that it's being intentional about the reflection and asking yourself those questions, those meaningful questions that are really going to help you to think about, what is happening and what's not working about it really at the end of the day. Then it's about, what are you going to do about it? So what? So then what happens? What action? Because we can all know what we could be doing, should be doing, ought to be doing. But if we then do nothing, and I really want to pick up on that bit. I think it's underestimated and underknown that, that having another human being to talk it out with, change isn't comfortable. Change is, disrupts our system, and depending how much change we've got going on, how much interruption we've got going on, we actually are trying to, through all of that, manage our own stress levels, stress chemicals, keep our brain in that place where we're thinking with clarity. And having one other human being who's sort of in our corner, got our back, isn't judging what we're saying, and is keeping us on track with what is working, what's going well, progress that's being made, i.e. training us to show compassion to ourselves, can make it so much easier than fighting doing this all on your own. And I think it's really important to recognise that, it's not just about us pitching coaching, as we both do that. It's more about, have you got people in your corner that's outside the system?
Yeah.
Because it's, those people that are in the system are going to have, what's the expression? I don't really like it, actually, some skin in the game. But, whatever you're doing, that's going to maybe cause them some interference. It's going to have a knock-on effect to them. So we're human. We're going to be impacted by it, and we're going to be coloured by, it takes quite a lot of skill, doesn't it, to stay there and listen to it, even though you don't like what you're hearing and it's going to affect your working relationship with somebody. So talking to somebody outside of it, and I hear so many people, what they tend to do is the only person they talk to is their partner. And so they just then their partner is, yes, it's a neutral person, but it does mean that all of your downtime is talking about problems that are in work rather than, having life and joy and living, which is great if it's working. But if it's not working and you're ending up in a pattern of completely just downloading to the same person over and over again, then you might need someone to train your attention with the questions they're asking you and thinking about what's the purpose. Is this just another interference, basically? I'll go and moan about it because it makes me feel better temporarily, but it distracts me from going to do the action that's required.
Yeah, I think there's so much in what you've said there, and I was reflecting on our relationship. I asked you to read the book, you fed back on various sections, and I think about accountability. The network that we're involved in, that has been so amazing for accountability and support. And that's very different from what I might speak to my wife about or my friends about. And I absolutely recognize, know your tribe, build your tribe, invest in your tribe, and be a great member of your tribe. And for me, there's the organizational tribe or team, there's my wife and family and all the rest of it. They all do important different things. But actually professionally, what we're talking about, my personal experience has been find my tribe, invest in my tribe, and the relationships that you and I have and with other people, that's where real accountability can be held, because the levels of trust are really high. You and I have both been vulnerable with each other. We've had conversations, we've built and deepened our relationship. I feel safe with you talking about, hey, I'm really mucking up at the moment, or you're going to celebrate with me when things go well. And I'm so passionate and can't underestimate the importance of that. So I know that's only point 2, but I just really felt so much of what you said was absolutely spot on, Cheryl.
Yeah, and it's so, and I brings onto that self-compassion. I think that it's, be kind to yourself. If you're watching this video, you might know logically that, the carrot stick, isn't it? Beat yourself up and, you're useless. Come on, you need to get going and doing it. And sometimes it works. But if you're now in your 50th year, 40th, 50th year, there gets to a point where you go, really? Can I keep on beating myself with a stick to make myself... I know in my book, there's a book I'm writing at the moment, the last chapter is push. There is a time to kind of come on, buck up, get on. And actually, we have an agreement with my husband. If I've said it several times and he's asked me, what would you like to happen and what is working, that eventually he has got permission to give me the buck up nod. It's because there is a time to stop the talking and the doing. There's a time for pushing. But I think that in all this positivity world, there has become that it's almost like it's wrong to complain. It's wrong to say you're finding it hard. It's wrong to, you have to be positive and you have to be, looking at all the good stuff. Whereas actually compassion comes from... part of change is it's uncomfortable. Part of growth is you feel vulnerable, you feel foolish, and when you make the same mistake that you made before, I'd argue, by the way, it probably wasn't exactly the same. It just feels similar, and then do a bit of reflection on it and go back through that cycle. You might discover there's some little nuances. It's not quite the same, but you might find some patterns that are actually, we're getting annoyed that you've repeated it. If you go back and do that reflection, if you said, or get some support, what you'll start to recognise is actually there's a common trigger or the thing that sends you down that path. And actually this is a gift and an opportunity to learn about yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And there is that whole gig around positivity fatigue. I'm all for saying, okay, if I'm, I don't want to suppress my emotions. There's an element of when you express and to what level. But if I suppress my emotions, I'm not completing the cycle, am I? If I'm angry, and I have to suppress that anger. And by the way, that doesn't mean I'm going around raging at everyone. But if I don't complete the anger cycle, I think it's sitting in me, and that's going to manifest in my physical or my mental well-being. So I think it's completing cycles, and that can be quick, or that can be long. But I think I'm not, certainly not into a emotional suppression culture at all. And I think the last thing I would say on all of this is, and we know this from the research as well, but in terms of the whole self-compassion, the more intentionally reflective we are being to ourselves, the more self-compassion we're showing ourselves, the more high level of regard and care we're showing ourselves, the more we're going to show that to other people. The more we're going to begin to think about how we have an empathetic response to other people, the more we're going to be a good, accountable colleague and friend to other people, because we're putting the work in ourselves. But if we show ourselves the high levels of regard, we've got the resources and we're more inclined to show that to others, without it becoming something that's very draining and us burning out. But it's okay to be focusing on ourselves, isn't it, and putting ourselves first.
Yeah, well, I think I did a post the other day about that. I could never get my head around this whole put yourself first thing. It really, my brain just because it was like this competition that if they're first, if I'm first, they must be last. And I do. So my reframe for me to be okay and comfortable with it is that, it's giving you and them equal opportunity. This is about equal opportunity and taking turns rather than, first or second, because it seems like some people are winning and some people are losing. But that's just my language thing with that. And I think we could have another interview. We really could, because so much has just come up in terms of that compassion and that emotion and expressing. I didn't know that I even experienced anger, really. And now that I go, oh, do you know what? I'm really angry about it. I'll say it like that. I won't have gone off enough. But just acknowledging the fact that I'm really angry that hasn't happened, or I'm really angry with myself because I've done that again. Sometimes, and I talk about this of expressing and expelling, that all it does need is the opportunity to say it out loud and for somebody else to witness it, just to honour it.
Yeah, that's really important, the witnessing and honouring, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's so important. And when I think about work with leaders or work with or anybody really, particularly when we talk about burnout and things, I often say this isn't about burning bright, burning quickly and burning out. And, when we can be so in that place, can't we? And organisations inadvertently can almost reward that approach. It's not because it's ultimately unkind, it becomes part of the culture. But I'm always warning myself and helping others to maybe think about, are you in the stage where you're burning bright, burning quickly and burning out? Because what we're looking for is sustainable leadership. Leadership over the long term. What I'm looking for myself is that I can sustain my energy over the long term. I want to get really into something. I can be in that, burn bright, burn quickly, burn out. So,
So I think that wraps up really to say, because I think I've heard that thing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you talked at the very beginning about sort of saying no to things, and you might be doing the stuff you like rather than versus. And I heard on a podcast I was listening to just a couple of days ago that said, you have to learn to say no to stuff you love in order to have time to rest, restore, recharge. Because if you really love what you do, you can get into that point where you don't rest your brain, your body, or whatever it is. So thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to it. I'm sure you're going to be on the show again, because I'm thinking we could do an interview on each of these sections. I'm sure we could go. Empathy must be another one that we can go into a whole load of detail on it. It's been a joy having you here with us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, Stephen.
Thanks, Cheryl.
So those of you used to the show, you'll know at this point we're going to say it's all very well spending your time listening to other people talking, just like me and Stephen. We've got lots to say. Trained listener, natural talker, me. But it's now time for you've given that time to us. You've listened to us. I want to invite you to listen to yourself. So given what you know now about interruptions, interference, and where your attention is, what would you like to have happen? I think I've just realised we're doing Stephen's model. Do a bit of reflecting, then what are you going to do? So what? Now that you know this, what would you like to have happen next? And once you're clear about what you're going to do next, think about, how do you need to be? What kind of you is that you that's going to be able to take that next step, do that small change, that thing differently? And for you to be like that, what kind of resource or support might you need? And as always, if you need a good listener, you know where I am. But don't forget that sometimes all we need is time to think, some questions to guide our attention. But occasionally we do need to get that other person to hold that space to witness what's happening for us in order for us to get that next level of clarity. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday. And she pauses because she's trying to find a video clip. Have a great week, everybody.